right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison, and this is Web Wednesday, the show where we bring on people that are much smarter than me to chat about all things web development. Now, typically, what we do is we bring somebody on to talk about a particular technology. So, if you've seen any of the recent episodes that we've had, we've talked about React, we've talked about Tailwind, we talked about accessibility, but being a web developer, and especially if you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, and you want to bring your application to life, you want to bring your application to market, it's obviously not just about your developer skills. That it's also about seeing, hey, is there a need for this in the market? Does whatever it is that I've built actually meet that need? How do I, go about doing customer research? How do I go about actually launching the project? Like all of those different things are skills which, if you're going to bring your product to market, if you're going to actually start monetizing it, all of those things need to happen, and you need those types of skills. And so, fortunately, I'm joined today by Damola Omotosho, who has a lot of experience in this space, and has brought his own companies to market, and is I think just all in all a great person to have a conversation with. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by you. So thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Chris. I've always kind of checked out Web Wednesday, so it's an honor to actually be able to be on here today.
You're very welcome. It's great to have you. So I always like to start here, which is, how did you find yourself where you are? How did you become Damola? How did you find yourself working in this startup space?
Good question. So for me, it actually started almost 10 years ago, and then probably really long before that. I grew up kind of in a home where entrepreneurship was encouraged, and really just ideas and exploring was definitely something that my family really encouraged. So when I went to college and, I was able to kind of play around in different circles. One of the things I found that I was really interested was not just the engineering, but how you could take something that you engineer and turn it into something that's profitable. And then my interest really grew the more I kind of understood more about software and the value that it brings to a lot of people. So when I got my first job out of college at Intel, actually, I was encouraged to attend a startup weekend. And for those who don't know, or maybe others who have attended, it's pretty much a extended hackathon, 72 hours, come up with a business idea, sit down with the team and actually build something, do a quick product market fit test, and then pitch your idea at the end of the weekend. And we didn't win, but what it really inspired in me was this like desire to see, okay, well, can I bring some of these ideas, some of these things that I'm working on to life? And here we are 10 years later, as a serial entrepreneur, but also a startup technical architect at Microsoft, where I get an opportunity to kind of work with others who are building their ideas, building their businesses, but then I get to build mine.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you still do a little bit of work on the side then, as well as what it is that you're doing at Microsoft.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's kind of core to my growth. One of the things that's nice about being at, say, corporations like Intel and Microsoft is, you get to work with really bright folks, but there is a bit of an infrastructure that's in place for large corporations and businesses. I found being involved in the startup community and startup world allows me to really work with some of the latest, greatest technologies coming out of open source, as well as an opportunity to try other technologies that are not just, say, .NET. So, Ruby on Rails, Python, the Django, those are all things that I've worked on in my startup projects or my side projects.
Okay. Is there a particular startup that you're really proud of, or a particular project that you're really proud of?
I got quite a few. As mentioned, I'm a serial entrepreneur, but the one that I'm probably going to talk to you a bit about today is Cardcraft. And Cardcraft holds a special place just because it's an idea I've been working on for a couple of years. I got quite a story to tell about it, but it's also one of my ideas that's actually been monetized and is generating revenue at the moment. So really looking forward to talking about that and just my experience building it and my philosophy on taking your idea from an idea to reality.
That's, I think this is a perfect then place to start, which is like, where do you go with that? Like when I'm thinking about, oh, okay, I'm building something, like I know all of how to do that on the tech side, but trying to then go, okay, now I want to bring this to market. I mean, it's like it's a completely different world with a completely different language with a completely different alphabet. At least in my mind, like I wouldn't even know where to get started. So I mean, what does somebody even just need to know to get started down that path of going, okay, now I actually want to bring this thing to market?
Love that. Great question. So, one of the questions that I had to ask myself as I was kind of jumping project to project, right, was what's the return on value or the return on investment? What you're going to find is, and this just goes for most things in life, most things take way longer than you think and take way more time than you think. And, building your idea, building your business, realizing it is definitely one of those things. So, what you want to make sure before you actually go down the path of dedicating hours upon hours, even dollars and thousands upon dollars onto an idea is what's the return on investment here? So for me, I developed somewhat of a framework that I've just been refining over the years that structures on building an MVP and then vetting out before you spend a lot of time doing development that this is a good idea. I have some stuff I can share on that, but it's essentially a 7 step process where step zero, right, is vetting your idea, right? If you could take a look at the screen, I'm going to start sharing. Um, the first thing you really want to do before you go too far down the path is survey at least 100 people in your audience. I mean, it's always nice if you can survey more, but in the example for card craft, one of the tools that I used was Survey Monkey. You can use a lot of different tools, but in my case, I surveyed about 100 folks and I just asked them, what do they think about my idea? And the thing that's nice is that this is a great way to get feedback on your idea in terms of whether your assumptions are right and whether your train of thought aligns with that of others. Because one of the other things we want to be careful for and we want to be careful about is thinking that everyone thinks the way that we think. So this step, and I call it step zero, is that way because what you really want to do before you get too far down the path is ensure that you have an idea that others would be interested in. So here's an example actually of what it looked like at the very beginning for Cardcraft. And I'll talk about Cardcraft in details, but I'm going to go to our website really quick just so you can kind of see what our logo is, because the first question was actually about that logo. Specifically, I want to build a brand where as soon as somebody saw the icon or the logo, they knew what they were doing. And in this case, if you look at this survey, before we chose that logo, we said, hey, what do you think when you see this icon, for example? And the response was an automated birthday greeting card, or well, the person said the icon's not appearing, but send something, right? Send something, gift email, and that's what kind of what you want to vet out, right? Because you're still early in the life of the idea, and you're able to now spend some time really kind of getting a feel for, is this a good idea? So the next question is, well, how many birthday cards or cards do you think you send a year? Some folks say 1 to 5, 6 to 15. And then, the questions that you'll find in the survey are very much along that train of thought and that line of, hey, I want to make it easy for folks to send greeting cards. I think that's something that needs to be an app, or it needs to be an idea that the world kind of sees. And before even writing a line of code, I'm verifying that, people are struggling with picking the right card or sending the card on time, figuring out what to write in the card. These are all things that are going to help you build your user stories and your really kind of your theories as you start to build your app.
So that's really interesting to me that you said that you did this even before you wrote a line of code. So step zero really was, hey, is this a thing, before you went off and tried to create the thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. And once again, for me as a serial entrepreneur, you have a lot of ideas, right? And once again, not every idea is going to pan out. So for me, I had to come up with a system or a way to be able to kind of vet an idea and its feasibility as well as the interest before investing the time coding, building it, that kind of thing.
That certainly makes sense. You also mentioned that the first thing you asked was about the logo. Is that typically where you start? Is with the logo, or was that particular to what it was that you were doing here?
I love that question because when I started this, I actually had a couple different logo options. And one of the things a lot of developers and entrepreneurs really don't think about when they start is branding and marketing. And it's funny because what I ended up doing is, I have a whole bunch of ideas and I've come up with many things, but the names were usually pretty bad. Um, So, as part of my learning, right, as I was kind of going down the path for this idea, I said, hey, what if I do this a little bit different, right? Because one of the things you'll find is, let's assume that you're a great developer, you can actually write the code, you can ship the app. There's a whole nother piece to being an entrepreneur and running a business that is branding, marketing, and design, and that's kind of why we started with that particular logo and that question.
Interesting. Okay, and so it's because I know that they mentioned this at one point in like Silicon Valley, the HBO show about like why so many logos are just the letter and that's it. Is that it's an afterthought. So I dig the fact that you started with the logo. Let's see if this is actually a thing because of the branding.
I love that, and actually, that's actually probably a great example. The whole Pied Piper thing, right? Um, I don't know about you, but I feel like developers are notoriously bad at naming things. Um, yeah,
True story. True story. Yeah, 100%. And then the last little thing I want to ask you about the survey is you mentioned trying to survey at least 100 people. How do you find 100 people to then ask these questions to?
great question. So in this case, what I've done is I've crafted this list, and some of the ways that you could go about surveying folks, SurveyMonkey. What's nice is a lot of platforms these days actually build polling and surveys into them. So like Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can find. And in this case, I went with SurveyMonkey just because, once again, with Facebook and some of the other ones, you could put out a post, but then your family and friends all reply, and of course they love you, so they're going to say amazing things. What what I like about platforms like SurveyMonkey is that they allow you to get a random assortment of folks all over the world, and that's one of the tools I would recommend. I think we may actually have a survey tool as well that I'll probably end up dropping in a link somewhere.
Okay, cool. All right. So that's step zero, which is reach out, do a little bit of market research, see if this is actually a thing. What's the next step from there?
So once again, still thinking about the business. And one of the things that I was really fortunate about was the ability to actually attend an entrepreneurship boot camp. A lot of engineers and developers don't really understand the business aspects of what they're building. Using, say, Silicon Valley as a reference, again, the protagonist was really focused on the tech, right? Building out Pied Piper, building this next internet, and what was missing, and what I thought could have been done better was really for him and for Pied Piper thinking about the business applications out the gate. So, one of the tools and one of the ways I've been kind of working on figuring out that is using a tool called Canonizer, and this concept of a lean canvas. So this is actually an example of the lean canvas for cardcraft. And a lean canvas essentially is a back of the napkin way of figuring out your business plan. It doesn't have to be thousands upon thousands of pages. This is something that you would normally put together using a set of post-it notes or a whiteboard, and this is just a digital version. So when it says comes to card craft, I've identified three problems. For example, people forget to send cards; they don't remember to send them on time. Sending cards can be time consuming, and in this case, for me, folks feel like they should send cards but they don't, and that could be for any number of reasons. So you kind of list out your problem, what your proposed solution would be. Once again, being an engineer, spending a lot of time at Intel, I think about process and automation. So could we automate the card sending process? Is there a way that we could simplify it, make sending a card as easy as, sending a text message from your phone? And could we now use technology to become sort of a second brain for us, right? We're already using it for so many other things. How can we use it to maintain our relationships and stay better in touch? That's kind of what the Lean Canvas allows you to do. Really kind of figure out what the problem you're trying to solve is and what your solution is going to be, as well as other things like, well, what are your key metrics? If I'm building an app that's going to allow folks to select greeting cards from artists all over the world, and I want this thing to do really well, maybe keeping track of how many users signed up would be a great way to see how I'm progressing, or the number of site visitors for a web application. And this goes into a lot of detail where, in my case, what I love about our solution is, we actually have a handwriting robot called Ravi the robot, that helps with that and plans to do machine learning, so that we learn how to mimic your handwriting. But this kind of a format's super helpful because it lets you really think about the business pieces in a way that doesn't bog you down in page upon page, but helps you think about what your unique value proposition is, what your unfair advantage is going to be, who your customer is going to be. For me, for example, grandparents, Generation Xers, millennials, people that have high ticket or service businesses. And then, probably the most important and probably at the base at the bottom is, how much is it going to actually cost? And what are those costs, as well as how do we make money, right? Because, I heard a saying that, a venture that doesn't make money is a hobby.
All right. I want to go back up real quick. That you've got that unfair advantage. What do you mean by unfair advantage there?
Love that question. Let's take a look at the first bullet point or the first item, cheap development costs. Well, the reason it's cheap development cost is because I'm the main developer, right? What I found in being both an entrepreneur and then also helping other people build their technology, they spend a lot of money on the software development aspects and pieces. And usually out the gate, that could be prohibitive because you haven't vetted the idea. You don't know if it's going to make money. So it's tough to kind of pony up, say, 100K, to get to a proof of concept. So why is that an unfair advantage? Well, the only thing that's going to cost me is time, and effort. So that becomes a competitive advantage against my, competitors, where they may have to actually pay, for their software development. I'm just putting it in time. And then once again, for this idea, I decided out the gate that, design and top-notch design would be key to our strategy. Essentially, we would source not just cards that you would find in the greeting aisle, but, a bunch of designers, and the best designers that we could possibly find, so that when you come to our app, right, you want to send a card that, or a postcard in this case, that says, "Yo, I miss your face." So when you think about an unfair advantage, what you really want to think about is how you're going to differentiate yourself, and then how are you going to make it so that you can go up against the hallmarks of the world, or the, papyruses of the world. And then for me, this has kind of been my approach. One of the other ones I'm going to point out, and this one is just important in general because of what we discussed earlier about the fact that startups and businesses take longer than we think, is that I have a long runway. I'm lucky and I'm blessed and fortunate in that I have a day job at Microsoft. So, if this idea takes off, tomorrow, or if it takes off 5 years from now, I have that time. And that to me is a competitive advantage, because during that time, a business who's spending a lot of their development budget on building their proof of concept, right, they may actually end up going out of business. So these are some examples of unfair advantages that, you can think about when you're building your idea, or really kind of in that still formation phase.
Okay. And you've also got customer segments put out there. How specific do you get with the customer segments, and how do you decide what your likely customer segments are?
Great question. So, for the customer segments, they often say you want to be as specific as possible. And the reason for that is because you often want to, when building a business or starting to build a business, think in terms of niches, right? So in this example, I've kind of been, a little bit more specific than saying, okay, all men and women in the US. 'Cause, technically, we have 300 million people in the US, and at any point in time, any of those folks could send greeting cards. But the question you should ask yourself is, who is likely to see this product or see this thing that I'm building and say, I need that, or I want that, or where has this been my entire life? So in this example, one of the ones that I thought was very interesting and it was super specific was this unable to attend weddings. And this was funny to me just because there was a summer where we were invited to like 9 or 10 weddings. And anyone who's ever gone to a wedding knows that it's, an investment. You have to get on a plane, you have to book a hotel, all of these things. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to say, hey, look, I can't attend your wedding, but here's $50 in a card. Good luck with your married life. So the reason that you do this is because it comes back full circle when you think about advertising, right? And who you're going to target and how you're going to target them. I throw on here people in long distance relationships, right?
Mm.
And then what's interesting about your question is I go even further. There's this concept of personas that you actually assign and you build, where you start to kind of think about, well, what does Shane the Simplifier's life look like? Well, Shane is 29, lives in Seattle with his girlfriend. He has disposable income. He works hard, and he knows that he needs to do a better job of staying in touch with his family and friends. He wants an easy way to be able to kind of do what he's continuing to do, which is building his business, being an entrepreneur. And it's funny because as I'm reading this, I think Shane is modeled after me, but
Little autobiographical
I
here.
it might just be right. He's committed to letting those he loves know that they're thought of and also top of mind. So he just needs to figure out a way to do that. Or in this case, there's Connor the connector. Connor is that high service ticket business item, maybe a realtor or a lawyer, somebody who has a lot of different clients that he wants to kind of stay in their life. And then personas such as Christina, the chronic giver, right? Someone who just loves to give and remembers every single person's niece's nephew's birthday, that kind of thing. That's the level of detail you want to have. And to be fair, you don't have to know or have all of this out the gate, right? Because the thing I want to be very clear about is that these steps have been helpful, and they're a guide of sort. And you can figure out some of these pieces later, but the more specific you can be about your target audience and who you're building for, the easier it's going to be for you to figure out what features you should add, what you should cut, as well as who you should target from a marketing standpoint.
And so now that you've got those personas, do you actually like refer to them by name when like during a meeting or when you're putting together a particular feature? Would you say, hey, this is something that Christina is going to want, or this is something that I think it was Connor,
Connor.
Colin,
Yep.
Connor, that Connor is going to want on the site?
Absolutely. And what it's actually nice about this is, I'll talk a little bit about my theory on crawl, walk, run later. But what's nice about this is you start to see your customers kind of fall into a segment, right?
Mm.
And you can now start talking about them in terms of, oh, this is a feature that Connor would love. For example, we're in the process of still doing some design for our what do you call it? Our mobile app, but Connor would love the ability to include a gift card or a check, right? And you talk in terms of personas and in terms of the folks that you're building it for, because once again, if you're building a business, hopefully you can use the app, but you also have to think about the person or the user at the other end and what their needs and their goals may be.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So now that you've got that built, then where do we go?
Good question. So we now have our business case, we have vetted our idea, and now we can actually start talking about, well, what should this look like? Um, I'm going to skip over the pitch deck just because we kind of cover that, but just in case you're curious, I'll pull it up really quick. just to kind of see what the pitch deck looked like for Cardcraft. Essentially, that's taking everything we just discussed, right? And then just putting it in a visual format if you're potentially seeking investment, or even just better so that you can better understand and communicate your problem. Everything that we've done before is for you or for your team, right? But the pitch deck and the things that you would see here are for others or to recruit others to join you in your cause, and why you would want to, really kind of invest or be a part of this team. So that's step three. But like I said, we can definitely revisit this unless if there's something you want to dive into here.
No, no. About the only real quick comment that I was going to make is the fact that you have very little text, all things considered, in that deck. That I noticed that it's a lot of
Absolutely.
graphics and a lot of just direct and to the point.
100%. So this is good thing to point out because I think that is another thing that we as developers tend to do. We're very specification and numbers and words and text driven. And what's funny about this is this was my attempt at putting this pitch deck together, which is surprising considering that I'm not the best graphic designer, that kind of thing. But what I've learned over time is you want to communicate as much as possible through words, right? What, or sorry, through visuals, what your idea is, because a lot of folks don't take the time to read. It's just a thing that's happened with the advent of the iPhone, all of the above. So yeah, that's one of the things that I would, and that's very, very good to pick up on is, yeah, I try to kind of let the design and the product speak for itself. And what's interesting about that is how we actually got to this design, and that's kind of what the next step covers a bit.
Okay, then let's do that. How did you get to that design?
Great question. So, what's funny about this is, as I mentioned, I'm not actually a designer by any measure. And not only that, but I just personally prefer to write code. So, how do I, as the idea generator, the business person, all of this wrapped in one, how do I communicate my idea in a way that a designer or developer or someone else can pick up what I'm trying to communicate and help me turn it into reality? Well, that's kind of where wireframes and mockups come in. And one of the ways that I've kind of approached this myself is good old PowerPoint. Now, there's a lot of different tools and systems and different ways you can actually go about creating a wireframe or mockup. But one of the things I want to point out is that a wireframe and a mockup is completely different from what we have in step four, which is the high quality design. Now, what does that look like? Well, for Cardcraft out the gate, it looks like this. I am not great with any of the design tools. So instead, what I did was using PowerPoint, you know, drag and drop the logo and put a couple boxes that represent buttons or what will be buttons in our PowerPoint deck. And the idea behind this is it's funny because you actually can, make this a mashup. This is, taking some concepts and things I saw on the internet I thought would be great to have in our design and sticking them into this PowerPoint so that once again, when I get somebody who has way better graphic design skills than myself, right, they know and they're able to take what I've drawn here or put down here and turn it into a reality. So that's one of the ways that I've approached wireframing, but you can also do wireframing on paper. There's actual wireframing apps and tools. And if you are a designer, you can actually do this in Figma or Sketch or any of the other tools as well.
So if you've actually got the skills, I'm actually, so it's funny that you mentioned that you did all of this in PowerPoint. That I've actually done a lot of PowerPoint. That I've back in my older life when I used to do networking, that I've actually like laid out full networks in PowerPoint. I've actually done like ORM diagrams in PowerPoint, and I've certainly laid out more than my fair share of little sample apps and so forth in PowerPoint as well. Like it's actually it's a pretty simple to use drawing tool, and it's got actually some really robust shapes built into it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think once again, just being a visual learner myself, anytime that I can't really conceptualize what I want to do, I will try to draw a picture in PowerPoint. And that's great to hear, because that makes me feel way better. I thought I should be using all these other tools, but honestly, what works. I think that's another big part of this is, figure out your tool set, your tool chain, and do what works for you. Because once again, a lot of this is the groundwork for what we ultimately want, which is to be in the development cycle.
Yeah, 100%. I remember Alton Brown, who's on Food Network and is sort of like, a dorky scientist who's cooking. And he had an episode where he talked about knives, and whoever the specialist was that he had on, he asked, what kind of knife would you recommend for somebody? And the specialist basically said, whatever knife it is that feels comfortable in your hand. Like, that's it. It's, don't worry about price point or anything else. Like, what feels comfortable in your hand, because that's the one that you're going to keep going back to over and over and over again. So I think that's sort of that same thing with like PowerPoint. Like, if that's the tool that feels comfortable and it's the one that you're able to use effectively, hey, keep using PowerPoint. There's nothing wrong with it.
Absolutely. We have a suite of tools, and you even saw a couple of minutes ago, we had Teams. Use what works, and PowerPoint for me has been a godsend when it comes to getting my wireframes done.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you've got the wireframe. Then where do you go with that wireframe? How do you then bring that into something that actually looks more like an application?
Great question. And this is also where we can start talking a little bit about being either a solopreneur or really figuring out ways to kind of build a team. And for me, knowing that, hey, you know what, my strength is not design. One of the things I prioritized, after I've done my groundwork and done this, was finding somebody to join my team who would be a designer. So taking that wireframe that, I showed you, I was able to kind of recruit a designer, by kind of just pitching them and telling them about the idea and what I wanted to work with. And the result was this. So, sharing my screen, if you remember, the wireframe looked not too far from this, except for these were rectangular shapes in Excel. The designer has taken the time to really kind of bring this idea to life, and taking the design that I laid out, the ability for people to come in here and personalize their cards, and really kind of turned it into a thing that allows you to better conceptualize, what cardcraft is about, which is being able to send a physical greeting card without leaving your seat. Much better than I had done with my PowerPoint. So this is very interesting because it covers two things, right? It's taking all the work that you've done, right, where you've laid out the business case, you've put in the time and effort to kind of, list out your problem and your solution, and now you're growing your team, and you're recruiting others, who could be either friends or, freelancers, or folks who are maybe listening on a web Wednesday like this, and interested in being a part of what you're building. And the result is magic, right? So for me, that has been one of the key things, right? That's non-coding, that's, just once again thinking about how do you build and structure a business and team. And in this case, I needed a strong designer. You can't see the words on here, but, and this was the result when we compare it to, once again, the PowerPoint that, we had up just a second ago.
Yeah, definitely looks much better. It's amazing what a professional can do. Um,
Absolutely.
how do you go about finding a professional? Like, how did you find this particular freelancer that did this work?
So this one I was lucky because, it was actually a coworker, a colleague, who similar, right? Does her day job, but when she's not doing that, she loves working on and doing design. And I got some time on her calendar and I said, hey, have this idea. I know that you have a passion and interest for design. Can you help me take a look? And once again, she saw it and she was sold, and, the rest, as they say, was history. But, that's just one of the ways that I found design work and talent, in the past, is really looking within my network and seeing who I have access to. The other way that I've found to get your app, your idea, things built, right, is to leverage platforms like Upwork or Fiverr, where you're actually able to go online and actually put together a job description or a description for what you need, and then get responses from freelancers or designers, right, to actually help you build your MVP, or to get the design done of your low fidelity wireframes or mockups.
Okay. All right. And now that you've got your markups, then or your mockups, sorry, then the next step is to go ahead and build out that MVP. Now it's time to actually write some code, or still not yet.
I love that question because there's one more step. Now, we've taken this mock-up, we've laid it out, we've got the wireframes down. Now what you actually want to do is, because you have now gotten these high quality designs, and you can actually technically do this step with your wireframes as well. But why not take those designs and prototype them through a combination of either Figma, InVision, or Marvel? In this example, I'm showing you the demo for the mobile app. But what you're able to do with those designs is actually sit it in front of maybe those 100 folks that you surveyed and said, okay, send your mom a greeting card. And in this case, right, the idea behind it is these tools allow you to overlay areas on the design that you can now click to see where folks are either getting lost or getting confused. So once again, this is before writing any code, but you're getting closer and closer to refining your user experience, and ultimately what you want to do. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'll sign up. And the idea behind it is, if you click on here, it lights up to show you what your options are. You can see that I can put in an email or password, or I can come here and put in my first name, last name, sign up. The idea being that once you create an account, you're here, and then you can add payment, and then ultimately get to the point where, once again, we want to make it easy for you to remember the birthdays and the greetings cards for those that you love. So you select your top five, right? What holidays you want to remember, and then ultimately you're here where you have a history of whose birthday's coming up, who you said cards to. So this, once again, is interesting because, a lot of times what we tend to do is we jump straight into development and writing code and figuring it out as we go. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've done it many, many times. But for me, one of the things that I feel like makes a startup or an idea hard is context switching, which is like, okay, what was the idea again? And who are we building this for? And what should this look like? By doing some of this work up front, you get to a point where you can actually jump in and code more confidently, in my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense, and I could also see then that you'd wind up making potentially fewer changes. Like there's still obviously always going to be changes and so forth. But if it seems to me that if you've got a better sense of what it is that you're going to be building through that prototype, that you're going to have less churn there just inherently.
100%. And once again, this is what it kind of looks like once that design's been refined, and you now have the ability to kind of just focus on coding, right? You know what the layout should be, you know what the copy should be. I know that's a hard one for a lot of developers and designers. What you oftentimes will see is the lower ipsum put in there, which is great, right? Because you have to make progress, but the more of those pieces you can have figured out, the more you can focus on delivering an app or a web app, right? In this case.
And what tool is this that you're showing off here?
Great question. So this is actually one of the design tools called Figma. And what's nice about this is that you're able to actually use it in a collaborative manner with your designers. And then not only do that, but kind of export out the designs. In this example, you can actually select if you want to say export out a screen, and it allows you to kind of change um, the size of the export. What's nice about this is scalable graphics, so these are all vectors, meaning you
Mm.
can just zoom in infinitely, right? And the idea being that, once again, as you're developing your app and you're going from, say, you know, mobile web or whatnot, you're able to kind of use this to kind of design and really get a feel for what that should look like. So these are examples of some of the mock-ups for the mobile app. But what I really enjoy about this is that there's an easy way for you to actually tag comments, right? Because the other thing that's really important is the collaboration. So in this case, my team member has said, "Hey, where does this box lead to?" Right? And you know, it's the sender, not the current user. That's one of the things that's really cool about this tool, and this is one of my favorite design tools. That, and then also that prototype that I was showing earlier, you get there by hitting this play button with Figma.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So so then Figma is able to then convert all of that into something that I could then go back to the general public and have them play around with that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So this one is really powerful because once again, from a learning standpoint, if you do have the time to invest for Figma, for example, what we did, and here's, I'll pull up the web designs, is, you know, if your team and folks are comfortable using this, you can do everything here, right? We still did wireframes just so that we didn't waste a lot of, I'm not gonna say designer time or developer time, but um, you're able to actually do your wireframes in here. You're able to do your designs in here. You're able to do the collaborative back and forth in here. And then for the other step of, you know, prototyping it and showing it to folks before it's done, you can do that in here as well. And then one of the other things that's really cool about it is it functions very much like a web link. So it's actually a website. So I can copy this and actually open it in the web browser in addition to the Electron app that
Okay.
I've opened it up in here.
I appreciate the fact that you've obviously done presentations before because you just seamlessly kept talking while it was loading. This is obviously not your first time doing this.
Absolutely. And then it's funny because I opened the wrong project, but you
Yeah.
know what? We'll keep we'll keep running with it. Yeah, no, you do enough of these and you learn how to make it work. But
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's
yeah,
funny.
so yeah, this is the wireframe of the design as it's, you know, looking, and there we go, good old Laura Ipsum. But once again, you know, you take that wireframe and eventually it evolves into the design or the web application that you know, that I've shared and that we were kind of taking a look at earlier. Um, yeah, we got to find it. We got some designs somewhere, but anyhow, I
Yeah.
think you definitely understand where we're going.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So we figured out. Hey, is there space for it? We've then started to lay out the plan, identify the advantage that we're going to have, and we've started to identify where the market is. We put together the little bit of a pitch deck so that way we can start to not only get potentially investors, but then also start to build that team that you were highlighting. Start to put together the very basic markups, even if it's inside of PowerPoint. Start to put together something that's more high quality, and then do the prototyping. So now that we've done all of that, now I get to write code.
Absolutely. Depending, and I say depending, right? Because um, there's one thing that at least I'm fortunate is that I can actually write code. Most
Mm,
founders and most folks aren't gonna be able to go from idea to coding. And you know what I like to recommend for founders who maybe are non-technical is creating what I call a work package. And what this is to me is just a visual walkthrough of your idea. So this is actually one that we did for another project. And once again, all the other steps applied. But the idea behind this is that, hey, in the absence of having the subject matter expert, in the absence of having the ability to actually write this code yourself, you should be able to communicate as visual as possible who and what should happen when you're using your app or your web app. So in this example, when I hit the login button, it should go to slide 3, which is here. People should be able to enter their credentials here. Um, these are things that if I'm doing the actual development, I will typically skip because it's automatic. Of course, the username and the password goes here. Of course, when you hit the sign up button, it should go there. But once again, not everyone codes. So, being able to kind of specify to that level of, hey, when you click from customer to barber and stylist, this should do a smooth toggle is one of the things that a document like this allows you to do. And then once again, makes you a better developer because when you're developing and building your app, there's no questions about what should happen next.
There's two things that really jump out to me about this. Number one is that it's getting very specific about this is exactly how I want something to look, and really it's then that non-technical entrepreneur that is putting forth, hey, this is really my idea, and trying to put in the little bit of graphics and like even like the smooth toggle, just like little details like that to really effectively communicate. Like that jumps out to me. The other big thing that jumps out to me is there again, it's the cheap knife that feels comfortable in my hand. Like this is using Word or
Oh, this
PowerPoint
is
or
PowerPoint again.
PowerPoint.
Good old
Yeah, PowerPoint
PowerPoint.
again. Good old PowerPoint again. Yeah, so it's like again, it's just PowerPoint. So one
Yeah.
more time, it's like it's not that fancy tool. So it's something that really any entrepreneur is going to have access to and can then make a powerful tool out of.
It's approachable, right? And it's also, the thing about this is, we've been talking about this, but this allows you to actually move faster. It feels like maybe some work up front, but you move faster. And doing hacks like doing it in PowerPoint and copying and pasting or exporting out the screens from Figma makes this whole process a repeatable one that you can apply to pretty much any idea you have.
Okay, I dig it. All right. All right.
And now we get
Yeah.
to code. I know we're close to the end of things, but one of the things that I like to do, and once again, the idea is not everyone is going to be a developer, but then not only is not everyone going to be a developer, sometimes you have multiple developers. Is I personally like to use a couple project management tools. One of those being Asana, but there's other ones such as Trello or Azure DevOps that you can use as well, depending on your levels of sophistication. And in my example, what I've done is for, say, the Cardcraft web app, I've set out the list in terms of just like, hey, we now have this set of designs. We know how the app should work, and essentially what you're now doing is you're just putting that in a format that allows you to kind of highlight, okay, well, this is top priority or P0. So, for example, you should need to enable the hyperlink to go to the card page purchase. So that ends up being a work item in a project management tracking tool like Asana for me. And then the idea behind this is that as things get done, you as a developer or the development team or your PM, depending on if you're doing Scrum or you have a bigger team, are just kind of like going down this list and burning things down, right? The idea being that, for example, we have a login page needs to have API integration. What's nice about these is that you're able to kind of assign users to them. You're able to actually go into it, right? So that, as you're kind of doing this and you're creating builds or you're putting things out, folks can come here and they can say, hey, you know what, change this color, right? And then once again, a lot of this for me is collaborative, right? So that everyone that's involved is able to kind of understand and be on the same page about things.
Okay. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious about it since it's listed there. Login page with API integration. How important would you say is both like API integration, but also then the a quick ability to integrate or otherwise share with social media? How important is that to a project?
Good question. So the question is around taking something that you've built and putting it out there, or being able to kind of share something that maybe you have on your platform on, say, like Twitter or Instagram, for example.
Yeah, really much more the latter. So I'm just thinking like from the user perspective of both a that I can just hit a button to log on with Facebook, but also be like how important is having like that share to Facebook or share to Twitter option on an app, or is it really not necessarily that big of a thing?
I would say that in this day and age where we are with social media, the more integrations you can have, the better, right? Just because everybody has their, pick your poison. I'm personally a Twitter guy. I love, Twitter. That's the platform I use the most. But some folks are more Instagram, or even Pinterest is another big one. So depending on your product and what you're building, figuring out like what platform and how to share it is always something that you can should consider. In my case, my cards are very visual, so your Pinterest, your Instagrams are going to be a great place. And if we can go directly from our listing to one of those platforms, it's definitely a nice thing to have. That being said, it's really nice, talking about the API integration. A lot of the big players, such as Facebook and Pinterest, now have solutions that allow you to kind of use their authentication or their OAuth system in the background to connect in. So what's funny though about that question, going back to my sheet is, I tend to do a lot of my APIs or my systems using, my own kind of IDP or identity system. But one of the things that you'll often find is that your solution will often grow, and folks will then start saying, "Well, I don't want to create another username and password," right? So ultimately, what you end up with is a an item that ends up in Asana that's maybe not P0, or but it's like, okay, add Facebook auth, right, as an option. And then if you're following this process, you would then add that button, and then you kind of use it to improve your capabilities here.
Okay. And how tight is that feedback circle? So as you're developing your app, how frequently are you putting it back in front of potential customers? Or is it we're going to go into a room and we're going to build this for a couple of months, and then we're going to come out and see how things look from there? And I guess sort of the immediate follow up to that is I'm assuming that the mock-ups that you've done and putting that in front of customers does help that cycle quite a bit.
100%. I think that's one thing that I didn't stress. A lot of this, believe it or not, is built to increase your speed and velocity.
Mm.
The sooner and faster you can get feedback, the sooner and faster you can actually pivot, either the design, pivot the architecture, pivot the code, right? And for me, what I found is it's better to actually put your stuff out there, get it out there. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about, and I skipped in my pitch, was really just my concept that I call crawl, walk, run. Um, this is something that I apply to a lot of my ideas, or pretty much any business I'm going to start today. And the idea behind is you got to crawl before you can walk. You got to walk before you can run. So what does that look like? Well, for me, the crawling was getting, say, cardcraft out on Etsy, right? And what was really nice about doing that was we were able to actually find out and see um, demand, right? And test out our theory of folks love these designs, right? So 1,800 almost sales on this platform. Well, then what do we do next? Well, we know we want to be able to drive traffic and better control our user experience. So that's where the Cardcraft site that if you go to cardcraft.io shows up, and this is actually a Shopify site. The idea being that the site that I'm showing you now, this one that we were just on, is actually the run, right? This is the custom site, or the beta, and it's a beta, but it's a working beta, meaning that I can actually A/B test my traffic, send some folks here to see, because we know that they're converting, or they're buying stuff here, and send them there, and then also send the other half of my traffic to my beta site. So I'm really big on that close, tight integration circle where, from having customers to test, I can ask any of these 1,800 folks to, try out our new app, new site, and then being able to kind of incorporate that feedback in, right? You might get something like, yes, please add Facebook authentication into this kind of like tightly designed system that really just comes from doing some of this groundwork before you start coding.
I find that really interesting because you started with Etsy, which for anybody who's not familiar with Etsy, it's basically where different I don't want to downplay this in any way, shape, or form, but it's, when most people think of Etsy, they're thinking about somebody that has a particular craft that they do and they want to be able to sell that craft. And so that's really where you started. It's almost just like, hey, I'm a single person. I've got this little thing that I like to do. Let me just try and sell it here. And there's also then in turn, like, very little investment on your part with both time and money, that it only takes just a few clicks to start selling stuff on Etsy. And then that's where you started. And then you went on to Shopify, which is one of a handful of different services that are out there that basically give you an e-commerce site out of a box. And that's like, that's really sort of like, just like you said, it's then that walk of like, okay, now we're going to pretend to be like a small to maybe like mid-ish size company. Of now we're going to use that thing out of the box, and then that run is now we're going to pretend to be like a mid or maybe even like a large size company, where now we're going to have our own custom experience and our own custom website. And then in turn, like the level of investment that you're making there starts really small and then just starts to grow over time. So if you realize here, hey, wait a minute, you know what? Nobody's buying these things on Etsy, which is obviously not true. You've had success there. But if you realize, hey, you know what? This really isn't a thing after all. You didn't really lose out on anything. That
Absolutely.
yeah. And again, you sort of also have those bailout points. So you're doing that constant, like you said, refinement and getting that constant feedback. But you're also then like mitigating your risk that entire time, and you're only getting to the end if you realize, hey, yes, we've actually got something here.
Absolutely. And for me, once again, I've taken the opposite approach. I've started with, I'm going to build the app and they're going to come, right? And couple of 100 hours later and a couple of thousands of dollars later, I've learned that's not always the case. So a lot of this is built around that, exactly, just assuming risk or assessing risk, right? And what you really want to do as you're building your platform, building your apps, building your website, right, is thinking about, well, what are the best and easiest ways that we can get a proof of concept out, take the feedback, learn from it, and then get to the next stage, right, or get to the next step. Because I think for me, my experience has been that's what a lot of startup is, essentially surviving today so you could live to fight tomorrow, right, and then also learning and growing as your business learns and grows.
I think that's like a perfect message to end on. That's like it's a perfect bow on everything that you've said there of kind of that start slow. That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. We've got like another minute or so left. Is there any like last little bit of advice that you want to give to somebody?
I think the biggest thing is to get started. I think I shared a lot. And, to be honest, a lot of this could be overwhelming when you're just getting started. But one of the things that I found, and I think is probably the most important thing when it comes to building a business, building your app, is to get started, right? You don't have to have all the answers today, right? But don't worry, they'll come with time. So for me, take what you've learned today, take what I've shared today, either retroactively apply it or keep doing what you're doing and pick the pieces that make sense for you. But yeah, my one piece of advice is, don't hold on to that idea forever. Go out, get started, and start building something today.
I love it. Beautiful. Damola, thank you so much for joining. I know I learned quite a bit. I hope everybody who's watched today and will watch in the future learns a lot. This was a fascinating conversation. I picked up quite a bit. Thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure.
All right, we will talk soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.